Have you ever disliked someone instantly without even knowing why? Maybe it was the way they talked, the confidence they carried, or even something as small as their laugh. At first you might think it's about them, but Carl Jung would say it's really about you. This is where the idea of shadow projection comes in, a concept that can completely change the way you see yourself and the people around you. From the moment we are born, we're taught what is good and what is bad, what is acceptable and what is shameful. Little by little, we begin to hide the parts of ourselves that don't earn approval. Maybe you were told not to be too loud, so you learned to quiet your voice. Maybe you were called selfish for wanting something, so you started putting other people first. These hidden traits don't disappear just because we push them down. Instead, they form what Jung called the shadow, the part of ourselves we deny and refuse to look at. But the shadow doesn't sit quietly in the background. It finds ways to show up, often in ways we don't recognize. One of the most powerful ways it does this is through projection. When you look at someone and feel a sudden wave of dislike or judgment, it's usually not about them. What you're really seeing is a reflection of something within yourself that you've been trying to avoid. For example, if you can't stand people who are arrogant, there may be a hidden part of you that craves recognition, but was always told it was wrong to seek attention. If you're irritated by someone's sensitivity, perhaps it's because you were told to toughen up as a child and learn to bury your own emotions. This is why Jung believed projection shapes so much of our lives. It influences who we're drawn to, who we avoid, and even how we define ourselves. The people who trigger us the most often mirror the very qualities we've buried in our own unconscious. The problem is, as long as we stay blind to these projections, we give our shadow the power to control us. But the moment we start recognizing them, everything changes. So let me ask you, have you ever judged someone harshly, only to realize later that you shared the same trait? Tell me in the comments, because your story might just help someone else see their own shadow. The shadow is not just a collection of bad habits or embarrassing traits we want to hide. It is much deeper than that. According to Carl Jung, the shadow is made up of everything we reject about ourselves, whether good or bad. It could be anger, envy, greed, or insecurity. But it could also be talents, desires, or creative impulses that we were once shamed for. The problem is that when we suppress these aspects, they don't simply disappear. Instead, they slip into the unconscious and continue to influence our lives in ways we can't easily recognize. Think about a time when someone's behavior completely threw you off balance. Maybe you felt an intense dislike for a coworker, or maybe you couldn't stand the way a friend acted in certain situations. In those moments, it's easy to believe the problem lies entirely with the other person. But Jung believed that what disturbs us in others often reveals something hidden within ourselves. The judgment you pass on them is often the judgment you secretly hold against yourself. This is projection at work. Projection shapes our relationships in subtle yet powerful ways. Imagine someone who hides their own ambition because they were told to stay humble. When they meet a person who openly chases success, they might feel irritated, even disgusted. Deep down, however, that reaction comes from envy, from the recognition of something they once wanted for themselves, but buried. On the other hand, projection can also show up in admiration. Sometimes we place people on pedestals because they embody qualities we wish we could express. That celebrity you idolize, or that friend you secretly see as larger, then life might just represent the part of yourself you've locked away. The danger of leaving the shadow unacknowledged is that it quietly runs our lives. If you constantly project your anger onto others, you may convince yourself that the world is full of hostile people, when in reality it's your own repressed rage coloring your view. If you project insecurity, you might believe that everyone is judging you, even when they're not. Over time, this can trap you in cycles of conflict, failed relationships, and repeated mistakes. The shadow has a way of showing up again and again until we face it directly. But here's where Jung's insight becomes transformative. The shadow is not our enemy. It is actually a source of immense power and growth if we're willing to face it. The qualities we repress are often the very qualities we need to become whole. That anger you bury may actually contain your ability to set boundaries. That selfishness you were shamed for may be the key to finally putting your needs first. That sensitivity you rejected could be your greatest strength in connecting with others on a deeper level. When we learn to integrate these parts of ourselves instead of denying them, we step into a more authentic version of who we are. Of course, this is easier said than done. Facing the shadow means confronting uncomfortable truths. It means sitting with feelings we'd rather avoid. This is why most people resist the process. It's far more comfortable to blame others than to admit that what we see in them lives in us too. But growth only comes when we stop running and begin to take responsibility for the projections we place on the world. So the question is, are you willing to look in the mirror? The next time you feel a strong emotional reaction to someone, whether it's anger, envy, or even admiration, pause and ask yourself, what does this say about me? What hidden part of myself am I seeing reflected in them? The answer might surprise you, and it might just be the first step toward reclaiming the pieces of yourself you've long forgotten. And I'd love to know from you, have you ever caught yourself projecting onto someone else? Share your story in the comments, because by naming it, you take the first step toward integration. One of the most powerful ways to begin understanding shadow projection is by learning to recognize the signs. The shadow does not reveal itself openly. It hides in emotional reactions, sudden judgments, and patterns that repeat in your life. You might think you are simply responding to the outside world, but often you are responding to the parts of yourself you have disowned. If you pay close attention, the shadow leaves clues everywhere. A clear sign of projection is having an unusually strong reaction to someone's behavior. Think about a time when a person irritated you far more than the situation seemed to justify. Maybe they were just a little arrogant, but your anger felt out of proportion. That intensity often points to something deeper. It's not just that you dislike arrogance, it's that arrogance touches a wound in you. Perhaps you were punished for being bold or told you should never boast, so now when you see confidence in someone else, it feels unbearable. This is your shadow pulling strings behind the curtain. Another sign is constant criticism. If you find yourself frequently judging people for being lazy, selfish, or weak, it's worth asking why those traits stand out so strongly to you. Sometimes, what we attack in others is exactly what we fear or repress in ourselves. A person who criticizes others for being lazy might secretly struggle with their own motivation but can't admit it. Someone who condemns selfishness might be denying their own need to set boundaries. Projection gives us the illusion of being morally superior, while in reality, it keeps us blind to our hidden struggles. The shadow also reveals itself in idealization. It's not always negative. When we idolize someone and put them on a pedestal, we are often projecting the disowned positive aspects of ourselves. The friend whose creativity you admire, the mentor whose strength you depend on, or the celebrity you see as untouchable might simply be showing you qualities that live in you but remain unexpressed. Instead of worshipping them, the challenge is to ask how you can cultivate those traits within yourself. Triggers are another strong indicator. When someone's small action leaves you feeling unexpectedly hurt, angry, or defensive, it usually points back to an unresolved part of you. Triggers act like mirrors reflecting what you have buried. If a small rejection cuts you deeply, it may reveal old wounds of abandonment. If being overlooked at work fills you with rage, it may reflect the ambition you once silenced. These intense reactions are opportunities, not punishments. They are signals that the shadow is knocking on your door. Recognizing these signs is the first step, but the real work is learning what to do with them. One powerful practice is journaling. When you feel triggered by someone, write down what they did and how you felt. Then ask yourself, what does this remind me of? When have I felt this before? Often, you will uncover connections to childhood experiences, forgotten memories, or unacknowledged desires. Another practice is mindful awareness. Instead of reacting immediately, pause when you feel judgment rising. Ask yourself, what is this reaction really about? That moment of reflection can turn projection into insight. Shadow work also involves compassion. It is easy to shame yourself when you realize you have been projecting. But the goal is not to condemn yourself further. It is to accept that being human means carrying both light and darkness. Jung believed wholeness comes from embracing, not rejecting these hidden parts. When you notice your shadow, try saying to yourself, "This too is me." Over time, this softens the grip of projection and allows you to integrate what was once denied. So the next time you feel a rush of judgment or an overwhelming emotional trigger, don't just dismiss it as someone else's fault. Treat it as a message from within. The shadow always finds ways to speak. It shows up in conflict, envy, obsession, and admiration. If you're willing to listen, it can guide you toward parts of yourself you've long ignored. And here's a question for you. Which sign of projection do you notice most often in your life? Criticism, triggers, or idolization? Drop your answer in the comments, because acknowledging it is the first step to taking back your power. Shadow projection is not just about disliking or admiring people. It runs much deeper and quietly shapes the course of our entire lives. The relationships we form, the choices we make, and even the way we see ourselves are all influenced by the parts of us we refuse to acknowledge. When the shadow is left unchecked, it acts like an invisible hand, guiding us into situations that repeat old wounds and patterns. Jung believed this is one of the main reasons people feel stuck, confused, or drawn into the same conflicts again and again. Take relationships as an example. If you consistently find yourself in toxic friendships or romantic partnerships, there is a good chance projection is at play. Suppose you have buried your anger because you were raised to believe good people never get angry. That anger doesn't vanish. It simply gets projected outward. You may attract partners who express rage for you, leaving you feeling victimized, but also strangely drawn to them. On the other hand, if you suppress ambition, you may unconsciously seek out people who are driven and successful, only to end up resenting them for having what you deny yourself. These dynamics can trap you in cycles where you feel powerless, when in truth it is your shadow that is setting the stage. The same happens in friendships. If you deny your sensitivity, you might judge a friend for being too emotional, while ignoring the fact that you long for the freedom to express your own feelings. If you suppress your competitive nature, you might project it onto colleagues and convince yourself they are always trying to outdo you. Over time, these projections can destroy trust and intimacy because they prevent us from seeing others as they truly are. We're not relating to people. We're relating to our shadow wearing their face. Projection also affects the way we see ourselves. The traits we deny become blind spots, and those blind spots create a distorted self-image. If you repress your creativity because you were told it was impractical, you may grow up believing you're not artistic at all, even though creativity still lives inside you. If you hide your sensitivity, you may convince yourself you're tough and unemotional, while secretly struggling with overwhelming feelings you can't explain. The shadow distorts identity by keeping us from embracing the full picture of who we are. Perhaps the most subtle but dangerous influence of projection lies in our decision-making. When we're disconnected from our shadow, we make choices based on incomplete information about ourselves. A person who denies their desire for independence might keep choosing stable but suffocating jobs, only to feel miserable and trapped. Someone who hides their need for love might choose partners who are emotionally distant, reinforcing the belief that intimacy is impossible. Each choice feels rational at the time, but in reality, it is the shadow pulling strings. making sure unresolved issues resurface again and again. What's most challenging is that projection often disguises itself as fate. People say things like, "I always end up with the wrong partner," or "bad luck follows me," without realizing it's not luck at all. It's the unconscious mind recreating familiar patterns so the hidden material can come to the surface. Jung called this the process of individuation, the journey of becoming whole. Until the shadow is acknowledged, it will continue to appear in external life, demanding to be seen. The good news is that awareness changes everything. Once you begin to notice how your shadow influences relationships, decisions, and self-image, you start to break free from old cycles. You can choose partners based on genuine compatibility, not unconscious wounds. You can see colleagues and friends for who they really are, rather than as projections of your own fears or desires. And most importantly, you can make decisions that reflect your whole self, not just the parts you've been comfortable showing. So ask yourself, have you noticed repeating patterns in your relationships or choices that never made sense? That's often the shadow leaving breadcrumbs, urging you to look within. Share one pattern you've recognized in the comments. It might inspire someone else to notice their own. Shadow projection does not only shape the big turning points of life like relationships and career choices. It also shows up in small everyday interactions. The way you respond to your neighbor, the frustration you feel in traffic, the irritation at a co-worker's habits, all of these can be colored by the shadow. Understanding how projection works in daily life is one of the most practical steps towards self-awareness because it turns ordinary triggers into opportunities for growth. Think about being stuck in traffic. You see a driver cut in front of you and instantly feel angry, calling them selfish or reckless. While it's true that their behavior might be inconsiderate, the intensity of your anger may also reveal something about your own relationship with control or impatience. Maybe you've been taught to always follow rules and suppress the part of you that wants to bend them. When someone else does it freely, it stirs up your hidden desires and frustrations.